Hi everyone, I'm Arjun from Factual.
And I'm Jill Zoe.
And welcome to Factual Fridays. Hopefully you caught our first episode last Friday. And basically this is where Jill and I discuss some of the important things that were trending in the news in the past week. Maybe you didn't catch all the details. We particularly like to look at different angles from the political left, political right, trying to give you all the facts so that you can reach your own conclusions.
Yeah, what we're going to do here is not provide you sort of extreme biased perspectives, but actually try and talk about what are the different sides saying and kind of what are the facts.
Yeah.
All right, where are we starting today?
Since everything is about Ukraine and the war there, there's of course many topics within that. One that's I think particularly interesting, and partly because we're in the media business, is the banning of state-controlled television and state-controlled news, so specifically Sputnik and RT News, which last week the EU banned outright. They were like, these networks cannot broadcast here. And then big tech sort of followed on and said, YouTube said, okay, we're taking this down. Facebook was limiting it. Twitter might allow it, but puts like a big fat warning label on it, and so on. So TikTok took it down, etc.
Yep.
And so the question is, was that the right call or not?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question, right? I mean, it's something certainly that we have struggled with in this country, right? There have been debates about some of the, extreme sites that call themselves news, but really are really very, very biased. And should those be allowed if, what they're saying isn't factual, right? And it's clearly not factual. Should they be allowed to kind of scare people and claim what they're showing as news when it's not? It's a tough issue. I mean, personally, I actually don't think it should be banned. Which you're probably surprised to hear me say.
I was going to say that, but it's very interesting that you said that.
I actually think it feeds into all of the dialogues about right.
Yeah.
These companies, these countries banning different perspectives and only speaking to a certain perspective. I think it should actually be available, but maybe what should be prevented is the targeting of people like on social media to like only show them extreme viewpoints and stuff that's not real, like what they do with it. Like that's where I think I'd be kind of focusing.
I like that actually. Yeah, kind of for the same reason. So you said the sort of the pro and the con of it, or the arguments for and against it. Clearly spreading information that is propaganda, and of course every government does propaganda, but this is sort of absurdly out of touch with reality propaganda. Who is it serving? Who is it benefiting by putting it up there? I completely understand the arguments for banning. The arguments against banning, I think, are also very interesting. The first is that sometimes these sites actually produce great news. So I didn't know that, for example, RT has been nominated for an Emmy for its investigative reporting.
Really?
Yeah.
On what?
I can't remember the exact thing. There's an article from The Conversation, which is a sort of an academic-oriented publication, originally out of Australia, I think. They said, these guys they actually do good work sometimes. Sputnik, I don't know, has been nominated for any awards per se. That truly does feel like very much the Russian, sort of mouthpiece of the Russian government. But there are two interesting reasons I thought were for against banning. The first was, by banning it, we don't know what Russian people are being fed.
Yep.
And so there's value in knowing how they are being sold on the reasons for the war and what's going on and not. I don't think most observers outside the United States, outside of Russia, are going to read Sputnik and go, oh my God, these so were justified. It's all, the US and NATO's fault. But on the flip side, we might actually find out, it's like, oh, so that's what their gripes are. Right. So I thought there's a loss of information. And then the second thing is that there are retaliatory measures.
Yep.
And so, as you saw, and you basically said it feeds into the narrative. Oh, big bad West! Look at them; they're trying to control us. See, I told you.
So
the West
now
is so bad.
we cannot show all of their news and their social media.
And
here,
so Russia just announced that Voice of America is going to be shut down, and you can't get it. And so, if you're a Russian citizen, you're losing a lot of outside media as well now.
Yep.
And if you're really trying to have President Putin sort of be put in his place and taken down, the best answer is if his own people are like, we're done with you. And the best way for that to happen is if they get all the information.
Right.
So I feel like we've sort of kneecapped the very people that could actually stop this the best.
Yeah.
That, I think, is the real reason to not do it, not because anyone loves Sputnik or RT. For what it's worth, we polled our audience, as we do every week on issue, or every day on issues, and on this one, 77%, I think, said ban.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and only about 23 said no or unsure. And it's interesting, even in the comments you see from the people who said ban, there was one commenter, they're all anonymous comments, and he said, I'm usually the person screaming, don't ban anything. But in this case, I just feel like these guys are just spreading such terrible information that it's just muddying the waters.
Is it worse than what some of the extreme news sites here?
It's true, yeah. I mean,
Bannon's,
yeah,
right?
InfoWars.
Yeah.
Like, why don't we shut down InfoWars entirely? And I think what you said is a really interesting middle ground to explore, which is how can we do it such that we kneecap them maybe from a financial standpoint? So YouTube saying no ads will run against your stuff, or you will never appear in the recommendation section ever again, but you're still on air.
Right.
So your visibility...
People can go to, type in your URL.
That's
they can
right.
go find you.
Right.
Right? In the same way they can type in Fox, or whatever, put Fox News on their TV set if they want, right? But you can't target people and just make sure that's all they're seeing.
Exactly. Like you basically just say, you're finished on recommendations.
Yeah.
You're not going to be recommended ever. But yeah, people want to find it, they can. And I think that's one. The second is, the version that Twitter uses and that Factual uses, which is more sort of warning labels and context, saying this is not reliable information. But if you want to see it, it's there for public consumption.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing that happened that was interesting, so this week, the Factual usually doesn't write news of its own. Our whole thing is that there's great news written by lots of journalists around the world and across the political spectrum. Our job is to find it. But once in a while, we write a piece when it's a really divisive issue. It's hard to get the facts. And this week, we wrote a piece on U.S. military spend and the arguments for and against increasing it. And this is one of the biggest, it's, in the discretionary spend category, I think it falls under. It's one of the largest that we have. There's this chart that people have seen many, many times on social media where the U.S. spend is like more than the next 10 countries combined, including China, Russia, everyone.
Right.
So a lot of people start with that starting point and say, what gives? Like, this is out of control. Why are we spending so much? And then another side starts with, look, the right way to think about it is a percentage of GDP. And by that standard, we're at the lowest we've ever been. We spend less now on defense than we've ever spent.
Really?
As a percentage of GDP. So, yeah, we need to hike it. So those are sort of the starting points of both camps.
Right. But what's the right way to think about defense spending? Is it really about GDP? That's just it's an arbitrary way to think about it, right? Like,
true. The
right amount to spend on defense is what you need to defend your country, right? So,
that's right.
But how do you figure that out, right?
It's a difficult question, actually. And I think for people who are very vociferous on this, it seems like an easy issue. Like, you look at those two charts and you're like, duh, it's so obvious. And you dig under the covers. So our analyst who wrote this, Phil Malin, he put together this table on the actual capabilities of the sort of the big three, the United States, China, and Russia. So ground personnel, Army, Navy, and Air Force, planes, tanks, ships, submarines, missiles, all this, like, as best we can find the counts. Because if you just look at spend, it's a little hard to compare, right? Because your money goes a lot farther in China than it does in the United States.
Right.
So you can't just go spend.
Right. And what are you spending it on?
Exactly. And so I think just us having, the United States having a higher spend than the other countries doesn't necessarily give you the whole answer. So let's dig deeper. And if you look at, again, this is also still not correct because you can't just compare counts all the time, like different types of planes, different types of ships. But be that as it may, what you find is that from an army standpoint, China just has the largest army. More people by a long shot, more tanks, more artillery. So they really actually do have a bigger army. On the Navy side, the United States actually does have the biggest Navy. There's some sort of slivers where China is quite powerful. For example, their Coast Guard is actually particularly strong. Very long coastline and, of course, very contentious waters in the South China Sea. But as a whole, the United States Navy is more power or has more capabilities, and then Air Force is a little bit of a toss-up. They have more planes, we have roughly similar personnel, but we have more drones and other things like that. So
we're basically sort of choosing different strategies.
Yes. So I think even though, the spend of the United States is whatever, 4 or 5 times China, from a capability standpoint, I think you could at least argue they're closer than you would think that the dollar values are. None of which answers the question of how much is the right level of spend. I'm not a military strategist, but some things that probably are obvious to most people think about it is the United States is blessed with 2 very large oceans on either side, which make it hard to really attack, in a big way with a lot of people without sort of seeing it coming.
Right. You can't just amass a whole bunch of tanks in the country next door and drive them over the border easily, right?
That's right. So the United States has some very geographic advantages compared to other countries. So I think the argument for spending more isn't always just pure defend the United States. I think it's a little bit of be the policeman for the world.
Yeah.
That's what it's turned out to be. That's why I think every president for the last 40 years has been complaining that other countries are not paying their fair share of NATO. It wasn't actually, Trump made a big deal about it, but actually a lot of presidents have said this is a big issue. And now, of course, Germany finally ponied up this past week and has matched the 2% line. So the United States has been like, look, we've been defending everywhere. We can't keep doing it. You guys all need to pitch in. But I think that's a big chunk of why people want to raise spending is there's a lot of bad governments out there. Clearly, no one else is going to step up. And when we don't step up, look what happens. Huge chaos. We do need to play good cop around the world, even if it's a maybe underappreciated role.
Thinking about that role, right, and what's going on right now in Ukraine, one of the questions people are asking, right, everybody's been watching this 40 miles of tanks, coming towards Kyiv and, so forth, and wondering, like, why doesn't the U.S. come in and do something, right?
Yeah.
Again, I think a pretty complicated issue.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
If this is our role, like, and Ukraine is begging, right? What's the right thing to do here?
Well, certainly from a public sentiment standpoint, which has to be factored in if you're a president, the vast majority of Americans do not want to send troops over. They've made it clear time and again, survey after survey, including when the Factual polled its readers. I think like 3/4 of people are like, don't send troops over.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to send my kids,
yeah,
right?
Exactly. That's the way to think about it, is that it could be your kid, not just some army base somewhere far away. So that's definitely top of mind for the president making the decision. The other thing I think is just if the United States / NATO goes in, does this escalate into World War III? And there's a legitimate nuclear risk here.
Yeah.
So this is not, like, I think, when you go into Afghanistan and fight, you know that it's going to be bloody and guerrilla warfare and maybe no winner will emerge, as clearly did not. But you're not expecting a nuclear war to break out.
Yeah.
You're not expecting an insane amount of weaponry to be pointed at your homeland all of a sudden. But I think that's the case here. So as much as I think a lot of countries want to help Ukraine or at least find a way to end this war, it's horrible to say, but I think most realize sending any of our troops in just makes it worse. Which is also a terrible calculus, because if you're Vladimir Putin, you're thinking, great, that's exactly what I wanted to prove. I've proved it now. I was kind of sure after Crimea. I'm pretty sure now.
Right. What should I annex next?
That's right. What's next on the map?
And then where's that line for NATO and the U.S., right?
Yeah. And so I think what you'll also see is a bunch of countries thinking, maybe we ought to join NATO after all. We were kind of trying to play neutral.
Right. We're seeing some of that right now, right?
That's right. Yeah, exactly. So Ukraine officially asked to be in the EU, not NATO. I think Sweden and Finland may be rethinking NATO membership.
Yeah, I saw something about that today too. Yeah.
And so all of which is to say that this is the start of yet another Cold War. In fact, the only person that maybe could help somehow is China, who remains an ally of Russia, who has not really condemned actions there, who has huge trade with Russia, particularly in wheat and gas. I don't know. They have the clout to kind of broker something.
But if anything, there are suggestions that they're, supporting it as opposed to trying to stop it.
Yeah, because I think at some level they're thinking, well, if this goes down, maybe Taiwan, not so hard to take over. So The thing that I think is that these sanctions that have been imposed on Russia, first of all, one interesting sort of upside of this is, I don't know if the world has ever been more united at solving a problem ever.
Yeah.
Maybe the last thing we ever did as a world was the ozone layer and coming together to solve that, but we've never done anything else since. That every country's like, we got to do this. And so all these formerly neutral countries like Switzerland are even in saying, yeah, this is bad. So at some level, maybe it's united the world in a way, which is nice. The sanctions might really hobble the economy, which is horrible for Russian people, everyday people. But it might be the thing that ultimately does take down Vladimir Putin more than even the threat of war, the threat of losses. Is if his economy just implodes. Of course, lots of other things happen, Supreme Court nominee and the State of the Union address and stuff. State of the Union, by the way, just one sidebar, is very interesting. I saw this observation that in President Biden's speech, he did not mention race or racism even once.
Oh, interesting.
And then he also very emphatically said, don't defund the police.
Yes.
Fund the police.
Yes.
And I was like, wow, quite the statement coming from a Democratic president. So to me, it seems like what's traditionally thought of as the far left, these woke sort of policies and stuff, maybe has lost its allure with the majority of the party.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a sign that, and it connects with everything else that he's sort of said and tried to be about, that he really is trying to be sort of more moderate. And I mean, that whole defund the police thing, so much of this stuff is all about marketing, right?
Yeah.
And it's the terminology and whatever, right? And by using that term defund the police, it's not actually exactly what that's really about.
It's the worst slogan for what it was trying to do. Whoever coined it, terrible slogan.
How to fuel a fire, right?
Yeah, exactly. It was not, even the people who were saying it didn't want to completely dismantle the police, at least most did not.
Yeah.
But you couldn't help but think that with the phrase. Like, you just killed it right out of the gate. You killed the idea. So it's funny. We interviewed, on the Unbiased podcast, we interviewed Jonah Goldberg today. So he's the founding editor of the National Review Online, very famous political conservative commentator on Fox and now soon to be on CNN. And so we talked about a specific point, and he's like, that was the dumbest slogan I've ever heard in my life. 3/4 of the population would rather either keep the police or increase funding given what's happening with crime.
Yeah.
Why would you start with that? It's such a bad slogan.
There are all extremes, and there are all extremes in our government.
Yeah.
And the reality is, I don't think most of the population really actually is that far over.
That's right.
Right? I think our government needs to figure out, our representatives need to really actually go back and understand, what are people really facing day to day, and what do we really care about, and what do we really need?
I think what Jonah said and what we've said in Factual a lot is politics has become a performance sport or a performative sport.
Yeah.
And everyone wants the flashy sound bites and headlines and the glib takes and all this other stuff. But if we were actually doing our jobs as representatives, most of the time it's really dull, it's compromised, there's nothing sexy about it. You move 2 steps forward, 1 step back, just inch the ball forward. No one's really that happy, but we're getting there. That's just not good enough anymore in the world that we're like, no, radical change now. Part of it is the environment that we're operating in, which incents our politicians to not really compromise and not do the things we need to just muddle along. Instead, we just want to fight and mudsling.
Yeah.
So anyways, it'll be interesting. I think at least his State of the Union was not particularly divisive. Again, everyone has reservations about President Biden, but it was nice to see him sort of tack towards the center in some ways. I think for a lot of people saying, okay, he promised to be a candidate that was supposed to be uniting both sides. He didn't particularly start out that way. A lot of conservatives actually felt that was complete hogwash. He went straight to the far left. Maybe he's finally tacking back to the center, at least in their eyes.
Yeah.
Well, that's it for this week. Thanks very much for joining us, and hope to see you again. If you like the show, please subscribe. Hit the subscribe button below on the channel. There's a bunch of links as well to our site if you want to subscribe to our daily newsletter, which is kind of the main way that people stay abreast of the news is the Factual daily newsletter. So check it out. And otherwise, we'll see you back next week.
See you next week.
Thanks so much.